Welcome back to Stoneheart Sports, and we're here. The Final Four is officially set for the 2025 NCAA tournament, and it's kind of what I expected and kind of talked about. We'll obviously dive into everything to expect and everything to know coming up. But this is going to be more of a podcast-ish style video, at least definitely. But yeah, probably for the whole portion, I would say. It'll be on kind of wherever you get your podcasts as well as YouTube. Nothing will. It'll still be edited like a YouTube video, but you won't miss any info like of me talking or anything. I'll talk about everything if you listen on podcasts. Just want to get both of those out there. Thought I'd kill two birds with one stone here. But just with the Final Four and how it played out, hey, obviously this was one of the chalkier years that we've ever had for the NCAA tournament. In terms of picking the Final Four, we had obviously, did have it here on this channel. We had two brackets. One of them did have it. One of them didn't. And, I think obviously other people definitely had it as well. I think specifically people who follow numbers like me definitely were kind of preaching this was something that could definitely happen and was more likely than you would kind of think. But there are some people that, that they don't really, they still follow all the numbers and they didn't even really listen. They still didn't lean into it. So it was definitely hard to really actually put into practice of picking all four onesies to make the Final Four. And I'm talking about like the CBS guys. Some of those had, some 2 seeds, like I think 2 seeds and 2 1 seeds, just for the sake of not having all the 1 seeds, like Michigan State in the Final Four. I think a lot of people had, or I saw one of the guys had Bama in the Final Four, Gonzaga, Clemson, yes. A few people I know had Clemson, Tennessee, Maryland, St. John's. I even had one of those in there at the start as well with Maryland. So obviously you didn't want to have both your brackets have all 4 1 seeds just for the sake of, playing all the odds. But that's, where we are though. And that's kind of what it was really leaning to. And that's kind of what it was leading towards. I went over in my second bracket video going over each region, how it was just so hard to see where one of these 1 seeds would confidently go down. Like, I could not really find a spot to get it. I mean, Duke and Auburn, I was most confident in their paths, I would say. In terms of Auburn, they still even came into the tournament on a little bit of a skid. Houston, I was the most confident in as a team, but they had some issues in their path because of Gonzaga, or in the Indianapolis issue where they have to play Purdue in Indianapolis, and that obviously came down close. And different stuff like that. They kind of had a hard road. And then Florida, who had, the most kind of trip ups in the tournament. And it was, because they showed the most potential slip ups with the hardest road during the regular season. And that's why in one of my brackets, I didn't have them in the Final Four. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. When I dove into it more, I kind of didn't love the Maryland over Florida pick. In my Sweet 16 bracket that I did the last video, so I changed it. But Texas Tech, I didn't even pick the money line for that game. I just took Texas Tech spread because I was not confident at all in Florida in terms of just winning that game. And it took an amazing comeback, and we'll get into that. UConn, they had under a 50% chance to win a few times in that UConn game. Florida did. And then obviously Texas Tech. At one point, they had a 5% chance to win with 6 minutes left. Florida had a 5% chance to win in that Texas Tech game. Crazy. So I think all that kind of brings me to my first talking point. Does succeeding this year in your kind of bracket pool or your bracket, does it matter? Or at least as much as it has before? Because I've heard this topic brought up online, and I definitely have an opinion about it. So the concept of picking very minimal risk brackets and complete chalk is obviously one that, is looked at as not frowned upon, but if you're bragging about it, you get, I guess, would say scoffed at probably amongst the general community. which I could see, picking a bracket upset, if you get a upset right that you predicted, makes you feel accomplished. And obviously, some people kind of, pick a lot because they want to predict a lot of upsets. And in general, bracket pool scoring, kind of the normal ones where you start off one and then it kind of exponentially increases, those are the first round upsets that they're ultimately inconsequential because of how low reward the points are for actually getting a real good upset pick in the first round. You get 1 point in the first round, 2 points in the second round, and a lot of them are, obviously coming in the title game, Final Four, stuff like that. Obviously, the scoring I do and the one I prefer, which if you're in my Stoneheart Sports bracket pool, you'll know it kind of does like a Fibonacci sequence where it does kind of exponentially increase, but not by like the amount that it technically should, like mathematically, because it kind of cools off. Because I think the amount of points you get just for getting the title game teams right and everything is like a little much, and it doesn't really value anything in the first round, but it still tries to balance it. Where I also add the seed number as points and everything like that. It still matters. Like, you can pick a lot of upsets and get rewarded. That's the point. But it still matters to get the most correct picks in terms of like actually getting the games right. It does. But you can't just pick all chalk in that bracket. At least maybe not normally. Maybe this year it'd be beneficial, but I think the people that are winning my bracket haven't picked just entire chalk. And I have a bracket pool that uses this method, and it has around 350 people in it. So we can get kind of data from that bracket pool once it's completely finished. But obviously with this year, there's a ton of people that have picked, all one seeds in their Final Four, and they think they're smart as shit, obviously, because they have, 7 of the 8 elite teams, 7 of the 8 Elite 8 teams right, or every single Final Four team right, or they're just missing one Final Four team. And while I think, obviously, the pushback for those kind of people is somewhat valid, I think you do, it kind of has to depend on the person, whether it really is something that you should say, oh, picking this way is invalid. Because do you know how often people pick chalk in bracket pools and win? It's not really that often. It really isn't. Even in normal scoring standards. Like in normal scoring standards, you still have to pick the champion, right? But even then, the title game teams, like you get 16 points for that and then 32 for the champion. So ultimately, those kind of matter the most. So yes, while people pick chalk and, try and go through and obviously get the right title team and title game, even that in itself normally just isn't the 2 best teams. Like we've seen multiple times that has not been the case. It's way more beneficial to try and find some kind of upsets and just count how many you generally have in your bracket, because there are literally always upsets, especially in the first and second round. There's literally always going to be upsets every single year. So just picking all the top seeds is kind of a strategy where you're just not really trying to even predict and just play the odds of like, all right, whatever. The majority of the top seeds are going to win, so I'm just going to pick that rather than trying to figure out and get the edge on which upsets are going to win. But this year, obviously, that wasn't particularly the case. So the people that didn't do that succeeded, but it's specifically for the Final Four. That's kind of why they succeeded, is because of what the Final Four is. And in regards to if it matters as much, I think it just depends, like I said, on the person. This tournament is literally unprecedented for how few upsets there were and just the total seeding of the Elite 8. Obviously, all 1 seeds in the Final Four, and it's literally only happened twice. And it's on par with one of the 2 to 3 chalkiest brackets ever in general. So the people that researched a ton, like me, they saw this coming and acted accordingly, at least tried to. It was even chalkier than I had expected, at least for definitely one of my brackets. My second one, I kind of did much better and is like going to probably win a few bracket pools if the Final Four goes the way that I hope it does. But there was literally a 5% chance at the start of the tournament that all 1 seeds make the Final Four. and the highest it ever got to was 20% during the Elite Eight. And the general casual sports fan that fills out a bracket, they kind of fit two molds. One is that they actually kind of look back and remember, briefly over their brackets they have of what to expect / what they want in terms of seeing upsets and kind of picking accordingly. And the other one that views it as, okay, I'm just going to pick all, if not most of the favorites because they're the favorites. And that's kind of their thinking, So as weird as it is, it's essentially like a bell curve where if you placed kind of the just how much people follow the bracket on the x-axis, and then kind of, weirdly enough, the success on the y-axis, where the lower it is, the more success you have, and the higher it is, the more wrong picks you have. It's almost like a bell curve, where on the far kind of left side, you got the people that don't really follow it a lot, but got super successful because they picked all, chalk. And then the people on the far right side that did all the research, looked at everything, and got a good bracket because they saw, hey, this is going to be a super chalky bracket. And then the majority in the middle, maybe not as much as, a normal bell curve shows, probably a little bit lower. It's probably a little flattened because there were obviously a lot of people that got this stuff right. But in terms of getting all Final Four teams right and actually going for the all 4 1 seeds, like, majority of people that still follow sports but not religiously college basketball are probably falling in that mold because they're like, this literally never happens, So I know it's a weird situation, but it has literally only happened twice. The percentage chance and odds that it was going to happen told you to really go against it. It did. But if you dove into the teams individually and the strength of each team and the path, it would tell you this is the best group of 1 seeds that we've ever seen. And if it were to happen, it would probably be this year. That'd probably be the case. So should you view it as a success? Yes. But in terms of putting other people down for it, I think it objectively just depends on the person. But at the end of the day, those people are going to have the same points as me. They have the same exact points as me. So realistically, it doesn't really matter. Hey, you got them right. So go ahead, brag about it. Go for it. That's what makes tournaments and bracket pools just so great and unpredictable, because your aunt or your little cousin who don't really watch, or they just pick, they win because they have the same amount of points as people who study in it a ton because they picked off the logo, like that kind of stuff. And that's why bracket pools are just so crazy and unpredictable. But the TikToks that kind of really, and just in social media posts that really crap on anyone who did predict it or anything or got it right, it's just your general sports fan who didn't really dive into the teams, but obviously picks a bracket because it's a big sporting event, and they just wanted to pick upsets that they say that, hey, I predicted this upset / they want to show who they predicted, and they think that it's just going to be the same every single year, or there's like a range that, generally happens. That's kind of the people that are normally like crapping on the people that actually did pick it right. But I understand their point because there are a lot of people that, didn't really research as much and did end up getting the same points as people who did research a lot. And honestly, it kind of means, a little more, because this year's champion and the title game for who you pick matters a ton. It's literally going to obviously separate all those people at the top more than ever, because the variance of people who picked higher teams, or the variance of people who picked the title team, like what team to win it all, was much higher than normal. Normally, there's only like 2 to 3 actual realistic teams that people pick. This year, I mean, some people didn't pick 1 seeds, but every single 1 seed kind of got a real shot, and it wasn't very heavily weighted on one team. Maybe a little bit, but not as much as you would think. And so the actual title game and the who's going to win it all matters a ton, and is going to really separate people, because you can say you got all Final Four right. Okay, what was your title game and who was your champ? I think that's just going to matter even more now. But it's going to be great because it literally sets up some of the best high-caliber matchups we have ever seen in the Final Four, ever. And honestly, in terms of just how this bracket went, if I had to pick one just regarding like how the bracket pool went and how this bracket kind of played out and bracket predictions, I would pick this year over something like 2023, just for a bracket predicting perspective. Because that year had San Diego State, FAU, Miami, and UConn in the Final Four. Was it chaos and fun? Oh, yeah, for sure. But people won their bracket pools by getting one Final Four team right, which was UConn. And almost no one had them really winning at all. The highest, I think, some people did, obviously, but the percentage chance, I was in a few bracket pools, I had one person out of all the pools I was in have them actually winning at all. And they got none of the other Final Four teams right. And, the issue with a great Cinderella run is that it always ends, or normally ends, in just a complete blowout / just them falling on their face. So that's probably not going to be the case this year. So, again, in concept, was it easy to pick? Yes. The highest correctly picking the Final Four, at least according to March Madness's website, previously to 2025 was 2015 with 13,000. All the other ones are around the hundreds. There's only 2 of them that are in the thousands, and a few of them are in just double digits. And then 2025, for comparison, is 285,000 in terms of what they have correctly picked. So does it mean less or does it mean nothing? No. I think identifying a trend and analyzing and predicting something that comes to fruition means something. It does. And I just wanted to speak on that really quickly. But that's enough of that. Let's go ahead and dive into the Final Four. I did obviously a crap load of research for this game. So this is everything you need to know for the Final Four. Starting off, Auburn versus Florida. Auburn comes in after being the number 1 overall seed with the best resumes that we've probably arguably ever seen for regular season standard. They ended up kind of letting their foot off the gas going into the tournament a bit. Lost 3 of their last 4 games going into the SEC or going into the conference tournament. They lost 2 in a row going into the SEC tournament and then proceeded to lose the next round to Tennessee after winning closely versus Ole Miss. And I'm serious when I say when I saw Michigan State versus kind of Auburn in terms of those were the only 2 teams I saw people picking to come out to go to the Final Four from that region, it was probably 50-50 of people picking Michigan State / Auburn to go to the Final Four. And it wasn't really just the analysts on TV. It was a lot of active content creators / just people in your bracket pool. And I think you probably had a bracket. The odds are that most people watching this had a bracket that had Michigan State in the Final Four. And that was mainly because obviously they wanted to just not have all 1 seeds in the Final Four. They tried to find some team to go past them. But back to Auburn, they end up getting past Creighton after a rocky first half, along with Michigan, but the second half was really kind of the best they had looked in the entire month, the second half of that Michigan game. They carried that over to Michigan State in the first half, where they essentially won in the first 5 minutes. And Bruce Pearl heads to his second Final Four, first time since 2019. They are 4th, according to the advanced analytics. KenPom and Torvik, if you hear me saying those are kind of, you've probably heard that before. That's where a lot of the net rating kind of comes from. KenPom and Torvik, those are just websites. But they're 4th out of the 4 Final Four teams coming into the tournament, but they're also 4th in the country. So these are literally the 4th best team, or the 4 best teams. And almost, I'd say every major contributor that they have was a transfer, aside from forward Dylan Caldwell. Every single contributing player is a senior, every single one, outside of 1 freshman in Tahad Pettiford. Florida, they come in as the 2nd most picked title team. The stat, it just came from one website. They could be the most for different websites. I wouldn't be surprised there. But I think they come in as the 2nd most picked title team. They started the year ranked 21st in the preseason AP poll. I remember reading an ESPN article where they said they thought they did votes for who's going to win, who's going to blah, 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 who's the most surprising team. And they did one that said who would be the first team to fall out of the top 25. And the majority voted Florida. They said Florida would be the first team to fall out of the top 25. They kind of had some issues in the beginning of the year. I don't think people realize they had sexual misconduct allegations against Todd Golden in the beginning of the year that were subsequently dropped relatively quickly. They really didn't get kind of noted as a top-tier contender until SEC play started because their non-conference was, just very weak. They ended up having wins versus basically all the top-tier SEC teams. They win the SEC tournament. They end up getting in some really close battles coming into this tournament. They get the 4th 1 seed, and they have to play on the West. UConn came in with a great game plan, but the talent gap there was just too much, and Florida is able to escape. Maryland, they were actually a good matchup. Florida was a good matchup for Maryland, but they just were able to bounce back after that kind of rough game, and then you have the drop-off again where you get in this Texas Tech game and literally a 5% chance to win, but Walter Clayton and Thomas Hawk come up clutch, and they somehow win in the Elite Eight versus Texas Tech. And that win, which I think you could view as that was probably supposed to be the kicker. That was probably supposed to be the one game where the 1 seed did not make it and did not fulfill the very low percentage chance and defy the odds that all 1 seeds make the Final Four. But they did, and it creates the most dominant Final Four that we have seen. With Todd Golden, the coach, having crazy success for a coach that had 0 tournament wins going into this NCAA tournament. He had 0 tournament wins. Pretty crazy before the season. Now they just get straight to a Final Four. They have a great mix of developed players that they've had, like Alex Condon, along with impactful transfers that they've had for a year or two. Walter Clayton, his second year here at Iona. He was at Iona when Rick Pitino was there, so Pitino just finds these guys. Elijah Martin, he was on that FAU team, just his first year at Florida, but he was on the FAU team when they had gone to the Final Four. And this is the matchup we have. Now, we've seen this matchup before. Florida had won at Auburn 90-81 in early February, which, something you normally don't see is having a previously played game actually happen again in the Final Four. It's pretty rare, but we can kind of use that game to obviously try and forecast this game and see maybe what played out and if there's some things that would probably change. According to, I think the lines I had, last time I checked, Florida was a 2.5-point favorite. Going to this game, obviously you have the stuff with Janiah Broome. He had landed on his ankle and his arm at the same time. In real time during the game against Michigan State, it looked pretty bad. He left the game, but ended up jogging back versus MSU and seemed okay, but definitely not 100%. And I would honestly doubt he's 100% for this game, but he will definitely play and probably be good enough. According to Evan Mia, he is a game predictor. He has Florida as a 1-point favorite in this game, along with KenPom. They both have them as 1-point favorites. Just regarding the teams specifically, the offenses are ranked almost identical in conference play. Auburn has one of the lowest averages in the country for offensive turnover percentage. They really take care of the ball. Florida is also top 5, but they are top 5, or they're also top 5 in something, but they're top 5 in offensive rebounds. So that's how each team kind of goes about getting extra possessions or taking care of their possessions. Auburn with not turning it over, Florida with getting offensive rebounds. In the game they played, Auburn actually had 4 more offensive rebounds than Florida, but still had 4 less turnovers. Auburn ended up having 6 more field goal attempts in that game. Both teams have an effective field goal percentage of 55.1 exactly. They have the exact same effective field goal percentage. And their defensive effective field goal percentage are both 45%. So very, very close matchup here. Where they differ is in their style. Auburn's opponents get 23.4% of their points from the free throw line. That is 16th in the entire country. They also have their opponents score 26% of their points from three. That is bottom 6% in the country. Bottom 6%. So, on average, the games they play, their opponents do not get a lot of their points from the three, and a lot of it seems to come from the free throw line. At least that's what Auburn kind of wants their opponents to do. Two teams that kind of come close to this in terms of opponents that Florida has faced was UConn in the tournament game, where they almost lost, and Missouri, where they did lose. Both of these teams have a crap load of their opponents' points come from the free throw line. And that's just not them being poor. Sometimes it maybe is with fouling, but they really try and force teams to go earn buckets. They try and block the perimeter and leave lanes open to have them be susceptible to go in while closing down, trying to not get and ones, but making them earn it at the free throw line. That's what both of those teams do, UConn and Missouri, and they almost lost to UConn, and they did lose to Missouri. That is Florida, and Auburn is very similar to that. When they played each other, it was the most threes that Auburn allowed in a game all year, both in terms of attempts and makes. Florida's free throw rate in that game was 16%, one of the lowest in any game involving Auburn this year. Both teams had some abnormal free throw luck in that game. Auburn shot 60% from the free throw line. Florida shot 83%. Both of those teams shoot around 72 to 73% on average. So if you kind of take the average of each team and apply them to this game, it's essentially a 4-point game, with Florida having had the edge here, a 4-point game, if you kind of average out the free throws from that previous matchup they had. So when you take that into account, Florida has a free throw rate lower than the game that they had played was an extreme outlier in terms of both teams' play styles. The free throws and the 3-point rate, Florida didn't get to the line at all, basically just chucked up threes and a little bit of unpredictable free throw metrics. That looks like if you were to say, okay, if this is going to be a little more normal, Auburn has the edge there in terms of game plan, because with it being the most lopsided matchup that they've had, you would think that it would kind of come back down to the mean a bit, along with free throw percentage, and maybe favor Florida. Or maybe favor Auburn. When Florida has a free throw rate that is 35% or lower, they are undefeated. And all of their losses have come when that is not the case. When they shoot a lot of free throws, they don't lose all the time, but that's where all of their losses have come from. Now, in this game, being objective, Auburn did win the offensive rebound battle, and Florida definitely has the edge there in terms of just their season stats. So we could say, hey, maybe Auburn doesn't win the offensive rebound battle here. Maybe that kind of evens out the possessions. But their turnover rate just for Florida, Auburn's probably still going to win that, because Florida's turnover rate is very poor. They have had more turnovers in their opponent in every meaningful tournament game that they've played. So the last 3 tournament games they've had, they had more turnovers than their opponent. And they've had double-digit turnovers committed in every single game except one in the tournament, and it was 9 versus Texas Tech. Their current turnover rate is 19% in the tournament. If you take into account the SEC tournament, it would be 17%. The only team Auburn lost to with a turnover rate that high was Texas A&M, when they had already locked up the 1 seed, and it was the most abnormal offensive rebounding difference for both teams in the entire season, and it heavily favored A&M. And that's the only time that Auburn lost to a team that turns it over as much as Florida has been doing since the SEC tournament. I think we could use all this to kind of assume that the amount of threes chucked up is probably going to be less, and Auburn is really going to prioritize limiting the amount of available threes and taken and trying to force Florida to shoot more free throws than they would like, which is essentially the formula to kind of beat them. I think Dan Hurley did a good job showing that. It's just you got to actually do it because, the team has kind of had an approach in terms of, hey, go ahead and try because we're so talented enough that we're going to make it to where you just can't do that. You're going to have to play a defense that forces you to, hey, if you're going to come and just have the paint wide open, we'll pretend like we're driving and then just kick it right back out for a three. So the talent for Florida obviously is the biggest thing that kind of puts a wrench in this. But I think Auburn is very much right there with them in talent, and that could maybe be the kicker and something that teams like UConn or Texas Tech just didn't have enough to overcome Florida. If Auburn plays with that similar style, I think they absolutely have the talent to get over that talent hump and be right there even with Florida just playing at a better matchup advantage. In regards to the style, Auburn allows 40% three-point percentage in transition, which is very high. And Florida is the third best offense in transition in the country. They're the third best transition offense in the country, Florida is. And Auburn allows 40% three-point percentage from the three in transition. Now, Auburn is obviously going to try and limit these transition offense attempts by obviously just not going back and forth, chucking threes all game and trying to go inside a bit more so the majority of their team can get back on defense. But it's still something to note that there is a bit of a difference there. Auburn has many ways that they try and run their offense, but the way they get most of their offense is kind of when a double team comes to Johni Broome and he can just kick it back out for an open shot, or they make an extra pass to get obviously an open shot there. Or if Broome is cutting to the basket after a screen. That's kind of where they get most of their offensive plays from. Florida gets most of their points in transition and in scramble situations, which obviously requires some sort of missed opportunity from the other team. And that is not fully guaranteed. So there's a bit of worry there that Florida's best and most effective style of offense depends on how the other team is playing in terms of if they're giving them transition opportunities. The biggest discrepancy here in terms of play style is dribble jumpers. Both teams utilize it. Obviously, a lot of teams do. But it's more so with Florida, and it's kind of Auburn's main defensive weakness is defending dribble jumpers. They are in the 40th percentile in points per play for dribble jumpers, which is based on if you're in the 99th percentile, obviously you'd be amazing for perspective. So 40th percentile in defending it, not very good, especially when Florida. Can you just think of a guy that maybe does a good job with dribble jumpers? I can. Walter Clayton Jr. That's who I can think of. So this is really going to depend on if Auburn doesn't allow fast break opportunities in transition, because it's where Florida thrives. A third of their plays are in transition, and they're in the 95th percentile for efficiency in transition. And if they can force them to kind of drive to the basket and go to the free throw line, which is their weakness, they can win this game. They are under a 70% in conference play in terms of free throw shooting, Florida is, and they're only 71% including the tournament. So their free throw percentage has fallen off just a little bit. And normally they don't have two great free throw shooting games in a row, Florida. Obviously it can happen, but that from what I looked at, that normally isn't the case. And last game, Florida shot 92% from the free throw line. So maybe we could have a little bit of regress down to the mean here for Florida, and they might not shoot as well from the free throw line. Again, not the most stable just prediction, but it's still something to look at. Obviously that, but in terms of just getting to the free throw line, it hinges on Auburn not having very poor shot selection to give transition attempts and opportunities to Florida. Obviously I think the biggest thing is this really hinges on Johni Broome being on his A game and obviously getting some help from shot creators around him. Todd Pettiford, Chad Baker-Mazara, Denver Jones, at least 2 of these guys, if not all of them, are going to have to at least be good, and if not, just be really on their A game. For Florida, they're going to have to try and force poor shot attempts for high transition opportunities from Auburn because they really don't force turnovers. Florida doesn't. So if you rely on transition, if you can do a good job forcing turnovers, that's big for you, but Florida doesn't really do that. And Clayton just cannot be the only one. Walter Clayton can't be the only one. Thomas Haw helped out last time too, but he cannot be the only one making shots. Other guys have to step up and help him in just making shots. And this game is just super hard to pick. Knowing Johni Broome's health is not 100%, and I think just having to see how healthy he really is would be something I'd be way more comfortable with. And without him, obviously, they're not winning. And so if he's not 100% in the game, is there a chance that something else comes up and he maybe is off the court for longer? Yeah. Or maybe he's not on his A game. Yeah, that's possible. This is insanely tough. It really is. I would at least take Auburn plus the points, maybe an alt spread, like an alternate spread. Like if it's plus 2.5 for Auburn, maybe do plus 5.5. But Broome not being 100% does scare me. As much as a redo in terms of a rematch of this game on paper, I think it honestly seems to favor Auburn a little bit matchup-wise, which is why I'm going to take at least their points. I don't know how healthy he is. And Auburn has just been slowly falling off with their three-point percentage, free throw percentage. Even though they looked great since the second half of Michigan, I think they're obviously going to create more opportunities for Florida to roll in transition if they're not shooting as well as they hope. Especially if Broome is kind of going in and out. Like if he's not absolutely going out for every single offensive rebound opportunity because of his potential injury, Florida, they can get an offensive rebound or they can get a defensive rebound and just kind of roll in transition. Because Auburn, they need to try and deny some of these defensive rebound opportunities for Florida because that's also something where they can just grab it and roll in transition. So if Broome is not just going out there and putting his body on the line for every offensive rebound, could be an issue there as well. And if it's late in the game and it's close, there's one team I know that has a guy who can absolutely come through more than anyone else, and it's Walter Clayton Jr. because we've seen it before. So I guess I'll go with Florida here. I'm not betting the money line at all, just like the Texas Tech game. I will just take the points for Auburn and enjoy it. But I think the Broome injury just does scare me a bit. And I think while Auburn absolutely has a path of victory here in terms of forcing, not forcing trying to force the opponent to take as many free throws as possible, limiting the threes that are taken. I think if it gets to a point where, like Auburn has started hot in the past few games, that means Florida is just going to take more threes. So it's almost weird to say, but Auburn can't really get up by a lot of points early. I think it'd be detrimental for them to do that because it's just going to have Florida just really like, okay, we're more motivated now to just take all these threes and everything. And, Auburn's good at defending the three-point line, but I think sometimes if you're hot, you're hot. And with how poor some of the guys around Clayton have been, I think you could look at it and say, hey, they might come back at least and maybe be a little better. So not very confident because it's such a tough game. It's a better matchup than people think for Auburn, so I would definitely be the guy to take the points, but I guess just because of Broome's health, we will go Florida to make the title game. Houston and Duke is our next matchup. Houston, before Kelvin Sampson showed up. He was at Washington State and Oklahoma in the 80s and 90s, got a big job at Indiana, and it ended quickly in the mid-2000s after recruiting violations that nowadays are essentially nothing. But he went to the NBA he went to the NBA as an assistant from 2008 and didn't come back to college until 2014, where he took over a Houston program that had completely fallen apart from its early days of success. The last tournament win Houston had before Kelvin Sampson showed up was in 1984 when they lost in the title game. And he was hired in 2015 and got his first tournament win for Houston in 2018. And now they've been a perennial top seed for the past few years. He has totally built a program here from the ground up. And the people there have kind of developed from not giving a crap about basketball for so long before he was there to being an insanely dedicated fan base. And I think another big thing there is Houston wasn't in a big conference when he was there. They just recently walked into a big Power 5 basketball conference in the Big 12 and have absolutely dominated. This year, they have a mix of guys they've developed within the program, Juwan Roberts, Emmanuel Sharp, as well as transfers that have just fit right in. LJ Cryer, Milos Uzan, and now it's just his best team that he's ever had. And then Duke, we obviously know the case here with Duke. But this model is obviously a little bit different from some of these other teams in the Final Four. You have, the best players on each team for everyone except from Duke are transfers that have developed and obviously played super well. And each team, I think, still has some guys they kept within the program. And maybe a little freshman here or there, like with Tahad Pettiford for Auburn. But it's mainly older senior guys and transfers. With Duke, it's not the same. It's a little bit of the inverse. They still have that, but obviously that's not their best players. They had one of the best incoming freshman classes ever. But I think this, while it may not be the best, like in terms of on paper, like recruiting ranking, I think this one was clearly more planned than other ones they had. For example, when they had Zion Williamson, Cam Reddish, and RJ Barrett back in 2018 or 19, that team was amazing. But it really wasn't as planned out. This one, I think obviously Cooper Flagg fits kind of in general anywhere, but they had Tyrese Proctor back as a facilitator. Con Knippel was just a perfect shooting/rebounding two guard that they got as a freshman. Kaman Malawach perfectly was able to play like in the paint, insane length. So it allows Cooper Flagg to just kind of do whatever he wants because he doesn't need to fill one kind of specific role that Duke is lacking in because they're not. But, they're so young. So what Scheyer does is he goes and gets some vets and big contributors from smaller schools to try and take lesser roles like Sion James from Tulane, Mason Gillis from Purdue. And it's honestly just been perfect team construction and rebuilding. Like absolutely perfect, which I think seems to be Jon Scheyer's biggest strength right now, at least as a head coach. And they have just absolutely dominated. Absolutely dominated. Part in due to the weaker ACC, yes, but they've still been amazing. Literally one of the highest rated teams of all time. The only team in the top 5 in offense and defense. John even has an interesting story in terms of how he even got to this position. He was initially looking at other jobs before anyone even knew that Coach K was going to be retiring. He looked at and was kind of confident in potentially getting the DePaul job. He was also looking at UNLV. He didn't end up getting the UNLV job, but was potentially going to go to DePaul. And his career would have totally changed if that happened. But then once Coach K said he was going to retire and they were going to hire from within, they went through the process and he was picked, and the rest is now history. So pretty crazy for him that he's at this, place in his career now to where he is, I think one more win away from having the most wins all time in the first 3 years with a program or as a coach in tournament history or in just college basketball history in general. The line for this game is Duke minus 4.5. I've seen minus 5.5 at some places. The advanced stats places have it as Duke minus 3.5. And KenPom actually has it as Duke minus 2. So, again, for this game, the advanced stats have it as a little bit closer. Both teams have the first and second longest win streaks in the entire tournament. According to Torvik, these have been the two best teams from the conference tournaments until now. And even if you just kind of do the entire NCAA tournament until now, if you just do the entire season until now, these are the two best teams. They are. This is one of, if not the highest ranked matchup in the Final Four ever. Literally ever. Both of these teams have one loss from the month of December until now. They have one loss from the month of December until now. And Houston's was an overtime by 1 point to a team that just got knocked out in the Elite Eight and almost went to the Final Four in Texas Tech. With Duke's offense is just, it's one that is essentially unstoppable at times, or at least has looked like that. Obviously with Cooper Flagg, who's arguably had the best freshman season of all time. Kon Knueppel, who is probably the X factor of this team, to be honest. He has one of the highest offensive ratings in the nation, extremely efficient. With, obviously not being a big, guy is crazy. As a guy that shoots the ball, having that high of an efficiency is amazing. But he's not even the highest efficiency player on their team because they do have a big guy who's crazy efficient, and Kaman Malawach. He's literally the second most efficient offensive big man, or just not big man, just player in the entire country. They are the tallest team in the country. They're top 5 in 2-point offense and defense. Great length defensively. First in effective field goal percentage defense. The only thing they lack in is forcing turnovers. They're around 50th percentile in the country, so right around the middle. And they are the only team in the Final Four with a negative luck rating. They have a negative luck rating, yes. If you remember any of the videos I had done before with luck rating, in terms of we don't want too high or too low there, they're the only team here with a negative luck rating. What can you take from that? Maybe not a crazy amount, but just thinking that computers say, yeah, they could have been even better than what they are is pretty crazy, even if it's just by a little bit. Houston, on the other hand, has the number 1 defense, which I think probably, if you were to compare Duke's number 1 offense versus Houston's number 1 defense, they are, I would say, maybe Duke has the slightest edge, but both are still insanely elite and a good amount above second place, respectively. Houston's defense kind of has a more of a focus on like perimeter defenders over post defenders, like Duke does, of which Duke is in the 15th percentile for 3-point shot contribution. So they get a lot of their points from 3, and Houston is the best, if not, I think the second best perimeter defending team in the country. Houston is both top 20 in offense and defense in terms of turnover margin. So they take care of the ball, and they do a good job forcing turnovers. Sorry, they're not second. They're third in 3-point percentage defense, which, I think has obviously helped them a ton. But what they also are is third in 3-point percentage offense, which has always been a problem with Kelvin Sampson teams, has been shooting the ball. They are third in the country in 3-point percentage. Now, they are, weirdly enough, pretty poor with their 2-point percentage efficiency, but it's because they take a ton of mid-range shots. They really avoid kind of driving to the paint. They don't do that a lot in terms of getting free throws. They're 5th in the country in terms of mid-range percentage, and they're near the bottom in terms of percentage of shots at the rim. And that kind of goes to show because their free throw rate is near the bottom of the country, so they're not going to be really getting to the line, which for Duke and, Kaman Malawach, I think they're going to have to change how they play a little bit because obviously they've kind of just been sitting in the paint like, all right, you're just not going to score. But now if Houston does drive in, they're probably going to do some sort of stop and pop or step back and kind of go on mid-range shots, which it's not the most efficient shot, but for this game, it might help them because going to the paint might as well just be useless with the height gap that's there. But Malawach and Cooper Kupp, with them being insane NBA prospects, they do have the wingspan to kind of recover and maybe force some tough mid-range shots, which would be ideal for Duke, obviously. But I think that would be something I would watch, would be how many times, like, if it's not a 3-pointer for Houston, what is it? Like, what are their shots? What do they look like? and how is Duke doing in responding to those kind of shots if it's not a three-pointer? There's honestly, I did try and go over it, but there's honestly no point in really going over how good like each team faced. Like, okay, this would be kind of how I've done before. This would be the worst three-point shooting defense that this team has ever lost to. Kind of what I did in the tournament. There's no point in really going over that for this game because these are obviously the two best teams that they're going to have faced the entire season, which is going to be each other. But I think it's by far, in terms of just comparing them, it's by far the best defense Duke has faced. Houston is, especially with kind of the road that Duke has had to travel and take in the tournament combined with the ACC. ACC was weak as crap. Everyone lost in the first round that even made it, and it was only 4 teams that even made it, and Duke was the only one that even made it past the first round, and their path was pretty easy. They didn't even face one really good defensive team. And obviously Duke's going to be the best offensive team that Houston would have faced, but they've faced really good offenses before. It's just with Duke, this is by far the best defense. So there was a little bit of hesitation there in terms of okay, how good of a path has Duke, or how good of a defense has Duke really faced? And does it take into account maybe how good their offense has been? I would go over the style of play like I did with the previous matchup, but there's not really anything I can really take away because they're both just absolutely amazing. They are both so good. Duke is balanced and can essentially play almost any way they really prefer. And Houston is effective in defending almost all of those styles. I think the key for Houston is to try as hard as you absolutely can to just crash the crap out of the glass. They have to do that. They need to control as many possessions as possible, which would also be done by taking advantage of turnovers and not making mistakes, because Duke doesn't really force turnovers, kind of like Florida. So if they can limit Duke's offensive rebounds, which would be around a 30% rate, and if Houston can shoot at least 34% from three, which is around their average, they can absolutely win, and the numbers say that they should. As Duke is 2-3 when they have an offensive rebound percentage under 30%, and their opponent shoots at least 34% from three. They have a negative record when their opponents do that. With Houston, they're not going to really be driving to the basket as much because that's not their play style, and Duke obviously just gets that out of there all the time. So hitting shots and limiting turnovers is just going to have to be absolutely crucial and going to have to be the game plan, along with just controlling possessions. The only other team that has a slower defensive pace than Houston that Duke has played was Clemson, and they lost that game. They also limited Duke, Clemson did, to an offensive rebound percentage of 24%. Duke had only 8 offensive rebounds in that game. So Juwan Roberts and Joseph Tugler, while they do have a height mismatch, they're just going to have to absolutely be jumping out of the gym and crashing the glass because they're at a height disadvantage there. I think with what helps Houston as well, like I mentioned, the possession length, Houston plays at a really slow pace. And Houston is insanely talented. But Duke's the most talented team in the country. And kind of how we talked about in a few episodes ago, the way you close that talent gap is by limiting the possessions, because just theoretically, the more possessions that play out, the more talented team normally wins because the talent is going to show within that game. So if they can limit the possessions and take advantage of them with, like we said, not turning the ball over, crashing the offensive glass, not allowing Duke a ton of extra possessions, and just shooting fine from three, which they had before, and they have all season. It's the best three-point shooting team Kelvin Sampson's ever had, combined with his amazing defense. They can absolutely win. They can. I think this could get to a point where Houston is just stretching Duke out, and if LJ Cryer, Emmanuel Sharp, and Milos Uzan are hitting their jump shots, or at least 2 of these 3 are, Kaman Malawach could be a net negative defensively due to his lack of kind of just being able to kind of cover on the perimeter in terms of his speed. It's just the length is really there, so it would have to be good kind of ball movement from Houston to where if he's too close or if flag is too close, kicking it out. to a different shooter. But with Houston not driving a lot to the basket, that could be an issue for Duke. And for Duke, it's just utilizing their height and trying to force Houston to drive in, which it could just be, hey, Houston just doesn't shoot very well, and boom, Duke can win. But, I mean, there are obviously, more ways that Duke can win than Houston can. But with Houston, it's a pretty clear path to victory. And honestly, their ratings in terms of kind of the stats for both teams, it shows that Houston can do that. The rebounding is just the biggest thing that does scare me. And I hope that it's going to be a emphasis for them. And if they don't get the rebounding, hopefully they shoot just out of the gym with a three, which I think they objectively can do that. And to be honest, just with their ratings compared to Duke, they just mean more to me. To be honest, I know that sounds weird, but they mean more to me because they've proven it versus harder competition consistently compared to Duke, who's also just a super young team. They would literally be the youngest team on average in terms of age and just experience to ever win it all. Duke would be. Now, am I saying they can't do that? No, but it does play a factor, I think. They'd literally be the youngest team. I think they don't seem like they're very young, so don't let that stop you from betting them, but it's something to look at. This is pretty unprecedented for how a young team like this is succeeding. Along with it being in San Antonio, which is 3 hours from Houston. Now, it won't be a full away game, but it'd kind of be like a semi-away game for Duke. The best team Duke played in any sort of just general road capacity was Clemson, who's ranked 21st right now in terms of their final rankings, and they lost in round one. And Duke lost to Clemson. That's the best road team that they've played in a road environment. But if I had to put my life on the line for a team, say, all right, Stone, you will die if you don't pick this matchup right. It would be really hard to not pick what looks like the best team with the eye test in Duke. And it's what I want to pick is Houston. My heart tells me Houston. My head kind of tells me Duke because I still really like the plan that Houston can have. I'll take Houston's spread for sure. If it's just in a pick one and deal with it case, yeah, sure. I think Duke's talent prevails. I think you can do that. And if we get to that point, it would be a Duke versus Florida championship. And I don't want to be anticlimactic, but I think the winner of Houston-Duke is going to win it all. I do. Does that mean Florida can't win it all? No, that's not what that means. All four of these Final Four teams can win it all, absolutely, which seems like a yeah, duh, but that's not always the case. Some of the lower seeds that get in, you're like, okay, they got in, but realistically, this is their ceiling. Like NC State last year. Their ceiling was the Final Four. And some teams that make the title game, you might say, okay, like they have a chance to win. But you could obviously look back and say, okay, if they're in the game, they can win the game. But you can also say, okay, like San Diego State, when they made the title game, that was their insane ceiling. Like they were just not going to win the title. And so, again, I don't want to be anticlimactic, but I think the winner of Duke and Houston is going to win. For the sake of having a kind of and I mean, I could dive into it if you wanted to, but again, I'm just telling you, Duke and Houston, there's just the style and how efficient they are and what they do and everything. It would just take some kind of abnormal performance from both teams, one good, one bad, for that to happen. And that's something I can't really predict because it would be disingenuous for me to do that because the numbers say opposite. Like there's not really a play style hole here. Maybe if it's Duke, Florida, like I would feel pretty confident about Duke. If it's Houston, Florida, that might be a little closer. For the sake of having a different prediction, just for you hearing it, I think, we could have, let's just say we hope, and I'll just say, hey, I pick Houston. And if it's Florida with Walter Clayton's late game heroics there, or if it's Auburn with a healthy Janiah Broome, I could see so many different combinations. I think Auburn and Houston and Duke and Florida are the two that I've had. I had Auburn, Houston one, and Duke, Florida in the other. So either of these would help me with my brackets, but any combination I think there would be great. If you want to bet on one of them, I would say I think Duke is plus 100 to win it all. You literally double your money. And Houston is plus 420. So I think Houston is the better value, but if you want to kind of do bet on Duke, where you're guaranteed to double your money if they win, and then also bet on Houston, but just at a lower amount because it's plus 420, I think that would be a really good strategy. But that's it. I know it's anticlimactic, but I think whoever comes out of this amazing Duke versus Houston game proves the kind of team they really are and would make me even more confident that they could go ahead and win the title. Again, I think any of them could, absolutely. We'll just have to see. It's just I would pick the winner of Houston and Duke. And, with that, whatever coach wins this tournament would get their first title ever and go down as being and prevailing from one of the most dominant and hardest Final Fours ever. And we will see which coach does that. Is it, Bruce Pearl, Todd Golden, Kelvin Sampson, who I'm really rooting for, or Jon Scheyer? And if Duke wins or Houston wins, I think if any of these teams win, it'd be one of the greatest seasons ever. But if Duke wins, I think, or Houston, but specifically Duke just because of their net rating, I think we have to look at it as one of the best teams of all time. Really. That's kind of the implications we have. So I hope there's going to be some great matchups. I really, really do. I don't want any crappy ones. So hopefully it's close. Hopefully Duke's not just better than we think and they're like that. But all the stuff I brought up to you is true. And I think the things that you should think about the most are the play style, maybe help that Auburn could have. And then along with Houston. And in terms of just, is Duke really this good? I don't want to doubt him, but I think it's just true. Again, I think Houston they have struggled with amazing offensive teams, so Duke could easily just win it all there too. But that's why I would bet both of them. But that's enough yapping. That is everything you need to know for the Final Four. Thank you so much for watching or listening. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe. I will get more content out. We will be doing an NBA predictions video. I'm going to go ahead and go dive into the NBA. And then obviously when the college season ends, you got the NBA draft. All these guys are going to be going to the draft. And so I love draft content, both for that and for NFL. NFL draft stuff is coming out very, very soon. I think it's going to be the next video after this will be an NFL mock draft. I've been doing a crap load of research on the side of my favorite prospects, and I follow the NFL a ton. So if you like that, please stay tuned. Thank you so much for just this giant boom that I've had this kind of tournament season. It's just been amazing, and I hope a lot of you stay. I hope we continue to grow a great community that can do more stuff in the future with bracket pools or kind of fantasy leagues or just a bunch of different stuff like that. I'm really excited and hopeful that we can get a good community growing here. If you want, follow me on Instagram and TikTok. I have stuff I'm posting on there. And yeah, just keep an eye out for more content in the future. And we hope for some great games this weekend. So as always, stay smart, stay sharp, and I will see you guys later. Peace.